Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, and I'm coming to you from the place where we just spent the last weekend talking to and listening to and learning from writers. And we're back at the Goethe Institute, where the 2024 and pretty much all the Aja festivals happen. I think it's the genesis of a partnership there with the Writers Project of Ghana. And in this continuing series of conversations with writers, centering on the theme of writing as activism to a large degree, I have my next in the lineup of writers. She is a storyteller, known also by the alias of the Spider Kid. We're going to find out what that one's all about. She is a weaver of words in many forms, including fiction, nonfiction, and spoken word poetry. She has been nominated for various awards for her prose writing. Her work is included in the Flash Fiction Ghana Anthology, Keke for Aways and Other Very Short Stories, and the Writivism Anthology, as well as And Morning Will Come. Writing aside, she spends much of her time looking for excuses to make everything purple. She has been included in the Africa Risen Anthology, that was in 2022, Tor.com, with her short story, Exiles of Witchery, and her debut novella, The Year of Return, has been published in the US with Android Press and in West Africa with Smartline Publishers. Ivana Akotowaa Ofori, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yay, I'm so excited. I'm looking at your bright smile, and it's always, I remember first meeting you at NYU at around the same season, they have their literary festivals. And so it's like, she's someone who's doing things. She's a young lady who's going to do things. So I was very happy to.
I mistook you for someone else on that day that we met.
Oh, yes. Okay. I think so. It's been happening to me a lot.
I still see her in you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to have to find out who this person is. Because a lot of people say, oh, aren't you? And I'm like, no. And then they hear my voice. And that's when they realize, oh, yeah, no, you're not the person. This happened to me yesterday, actually, because they waved and they were like, oh, I was like, okay, well, at least I'm fitting in.
You have that familiarity, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So let's get to our conversation. Let's start with where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
All right. So I am from Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born and raised in Accra, and then subsequently went to school in Tema, which is 1 city away from Accra.
Mm-hmm. That's where I live.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. And then went to college in the US, in California.
Okay.
Although I did spend some time studying at UCT in Cape Town, South Africa.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Ghana, although every week, every few days actually, I get told that I don't look Ghanaian by Ghanaians.
What do they say? You can look Kenyan?
Kenyan, Tanzanian, South African,
I can see.
Nigerian, just anything but Ghanaian. I recently got asked if I'm from Central Africa, which was a very new one.
By a Ghanaian.
By a Ghanaian.
Really?
Yeah, every time I step out of my house, I hear Ghanaian. Oh, Jamaican, of course, because I have that one.
Oh, okay.
American, a lot.
Okay.
I am legally American also.
Okay.
But I don't identify as American.
Right.
I would say that I'm local to Accra.
Mm-hmm.
Although if you gave me the chance, I would probably move back to Los Angeles. I loved it there as well. It felt very natural for me.
Yeah. Nice. So what is your craft?
My craft is storytelling. My first love is prose. So I love to write prose, especially fiction. But I also write a lot of nonfiction. I've had a blog for more than 10 years, I think, at this point.
What's the name of your blog?
Right now, it's just called the Private Kids Blog.
Okay. Yeah.
The name of it has changed very often over the decade. But it's called the Spider Kids Blog now. I've written poetry. I perform a lot of poetry. I guess I have also evolved into a bit of a rapper. from
I saw.
yeah, I've done screenwriting, I've written for a couple of web series and created a scripted podcast. I wrote the entire script for that as well. So basically anything that has to do with storytelling is my domain. I love words.
Okay. Yeah. So weaver of
Yeah.
okay, a few things. How did storytelling, how did you decide? I mean, I talk to storytellers and they're like, I've just always been a storyteller. I would be on the playground, I would imagine things, I would write. Me, myself, I spent summer holidays writing novels with one of my girlfriends. We just were like, oh, let's write stories. I remember we had a set of encyclopedias. I wanted my story to be set in Connecticut. So I did all this research and created a whole place. And so I say that to ask, when in you did it click that that was definitely your way? Because I am coming back to being that storyteller self after doing all these other things. So tell us how you, at this young age in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, so my journey, I think, started when I was 10 years old. That's when I decided I wanted to be a writer. I think by that point, it had been brewing inside my young mind for about 3 years. Yeah, because
It's like early days.
early days,
Like as soon as you started to read, to write,
not
kind
really.
of.
Well, it's sort of, yeah. As soon
Yeah.
as I started to write, I decided I wanted to be a writer. But before that, it was reading that I had done. So when I was a very young child, I did not like reading at all. And then the floodgates sort of broke open by the time I was about 7 years old with the introduction of Roald Dahl's The BFG. I was like, oh,
Who?
Roald Dahl. He's this Irish originating British writer from back in the day. He's been through at least one world war, so that's
Interesting. And I grew up in the US, so I think this is definitely like
oh my
a UK
gosh.
thing.
Have you ever heard of James and the Giant Peach?
No.
Willy Wonka?
Yes.
He wrote the book
Oh,
Charlie and the
okay.
Chocolate Factory.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I wasn't into that Charlie, the Chocolate Factory, so I
Okay.
get it. Okay. So that's my own ignorance.
That's okay, that's okay. So Roald Dahl sort of broke open the floodgates, and after that, I started reading everything. As children's literature. Like I was reading like Jane Austen or whatever at like
What?
9 years old. Yeah.
That's complicated, but it was like soap operas. Yeah.
I guess.
Romance novels. That's kind of what they were.
That too, yeah.
Yeah.
I was reading Gulliver's Travels. I mean, yeah,
Anything.
all of the things.
Yeah.
Children's books, classics, like adults books.
So was your first language English?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I went to a school that wanted very much to be international. It was very. It had remnants of colonialism, like still laced into it, and so the school had the type of leadership that would tell parents not to speak local languages at home with their children because then they wouldn't be able to learn English well. So my mother is Asante, so Asante is actually my second language, not my first. So my first language is English, but yeah, I spent 3 years just absorbing stories, and then when I was 10, decided to start trying to write some of my own. And as soon as I wrote my first one, I printed it out, distributed it to my family members. I'm pretty sure only my grandpa read it, and he's a very tough man to please. He read it and he was like, "This is really good." And I got praise from my grandpa and said, "You know what? This is my thing. This is my special." So I decided at 10 years old, and yeah, I've been doing it for the last many years.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. So what was that first title?
I think that first one was called Search for the Voice. It was about a girl who lost her voice and decided to go all around her neighborhood looking for it. Because I thought I was clever. I thought I had come up with the best plot ever. Like, wow, I'm so funny. She just went around the neighborhood looking for her voice. It's kind of dumb.
No, actually, it's actually quite innovative for that age, right? Well, Grandpa liked it, so
He did.
Yeah,
He did.
yeah, that worked out well. Okay, so you're a young writer, so you're doing the writing thing, and then you grow up how did you decide to go to school abroad? Was that always something that you'd wanted to do? What was the impetus for that?
Funny enough, I started hating school around age 13. This is the genesis of a lot of my problems in life. That era in my life was sort of like the onset of some, mental health challenges. But essentially, I faced a lot of pressure to get into the high school that I went to. Parental pressure, especially. And by the time I was getting ready to leave high school, I was nearly done with school at all. I wasn't actually sure if I wanted to go to college because I was just tired of it all. I was just like, what is the point of all of this?
So you went to Tema Secondary?
No, I went to SOS Herman
Oh, SOS.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the first writing projects I undertook in my very first year of high school was just like a series that questioned Ghanaians and I guess Africans' relationship to academics. Because a lot of it just felt like, what exactly is the root of all of this pressure? So I wanted to be a writer since before high school, but then I faced a lot of opposition from everyone who told me that I would just die broke and homeless if I pursued that.
Right.
And so one of my goals in applying to college is actually to get away from all of these expectations. Because first of all, I wasn't into the whole school thing, but I was like, if I must continue, I would like to continue far away out of the reach of the people that I felt like were trying to steer me off the path that I wanted to be on. And besides being far away, to actually try and study what I was interested in. Funny enough, I applied to Pomona, the college that I went to, about, I think, the day that the applications
was closing.
Yes, and I'm so glad that I got in because it was a really good time. But yeah, essentially, I was running away and trying to find my own path. They found me. They found me when I tried to run away, so I didn't completely escape. But I did get to study what I wanted to study, and that, I think, really transformed my relationship to it.
It's so interesting that you recognized at such an early age that the system was already structured in a way that alienated you from wanting knowledge for the purity of knowledge, And so you went away, you studied what you wanted to study, and then why the where? How did you come to be living, working, playing where you are currently? So back here in Ghana.
Yeah. So I went into college intending to be an English major because I wanted to be a writer. That was the closest thing that my school offered. After just a few courses, I felt like that major was just a little too Caucasian for me. I was like, I don't know how many dead white authors I can
that's real.
And most of the literature courses that I was really interested in were actually course listed with Africana studies.
Okay.
And so by my second year, when I had to declare a major, I ended up choosing Africana studies. And rather than specialize in literature, I actually chose to specialize in history, Africana history, because I felt like I could either study the literary works or I could study the material that would feed into the sort of literary works that I wanted to create. And so I chose the latter. And I do notice this trend. Authors write from their local surroundings. Their origins are often very heavy influencers, but where they are physically based tends to compete very heavily with that. So you might notice, for example, like when Chimamanda lived in Nigeria, the material that came out of her was purple hibiscus, right? And then when Chimamanda had lived experience in the US, what came out of her was Americana.
Right.
There are so many authors that I could mention, like this trend repeating itself with. I felt like I wanted to be based in the place that influenced my story, as well as the place where my first intended audience was also based. And for me, that was Africa That was Ghana, right? That was Accra. So I made the decision to come back home once I finished my degree to basically be a sponge, absorb the culture, absorb the current. History is easy to study from books. The present is not so easy to understand if you're not living it. And I didn't want that degree of detachment because I felt like class wise, I already had a vast degree of separation from the general population of Accra. There's the language I speak, my level of education, my experience living abroad. I was like, I don't also want to be so far removed that I don't even understand what city life in Accra is.
Yeah.
So I came back. That's how I landed where I am now.
Okay. All right. So when you were talking about your where you're from and where you are local, I like to get a little bit more specific just because we like to put the globe into the conversation. So when you mentioned you're from Accra, tell us more and what part of the city has you is your neighborhood?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When a Ghanaian in Ghana asks you where you are from, they usually mean,
The village.
yes,
Yes.
your ethnic composition.
Ah, yes.
And
yes.
none of my ethnicities are in any way related to Accra. I'm not Ghana in the least.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Not
Okay.
one drop.
Yes, which is why people ask you all the times, are you Ghanaian, right? Because most of us are used to, in Accra, we're either used to seeing the Ga look or the Ashanti look.
But I am a South.
Yeah.
A large forehead. I have an East African forehead and it's covering a lot. And I guess my accent also sounds like international.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
the international Ghanaian accent, not
Yeah.
the typical Ghanaian accent. Yeah.
Okay.
So I am from Laboni. I have lived in
Oh,
one
okay.
house my entire life.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think that most people don't know Laboni's history.
Yes, tell us. I was literally thinking about, I was talking to someone yesterday and the areas that I know are Ga areas, right? Like Jamestown, Osu, Latabuya-Koshi, North Kaneshi, Kaneshi.
Yeah.
But then I thought about the cantonments and Labone.
Yes.
There's a lot of Gas there, and La is Ga.
Yes.
But there's more to that story.
Yes.
So tell us more about that melting pot that is Labone.
Okay. So obviously I wasn't there when the body was not developed, but
Yeah.
one of my great aunts says like when she first came to Accra, she's Ewe. Like my father's side is my father's father is Ewe. So
Okay.
they're from the Volta region, from back home. My great aunt said that when she first came to Accra, like where we are, it was nothing but bush. Like this was all bush. But my grandmother was a civil servant. She was director of state housing in the 70s, 80s era when Ghana was still sort of relatively new, an adolescent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happened was basically that the Laboni and Cantonment area was designated for residents for civil servants. So the government typically owns the land in these areas, and they would allocate leases for their civil servants,
Right.
so that they could build houses and so on. So I think the reason why Laboni and councilments have this reputation for being bougie is that they were literally developed for people.
The
who work
bush.
for
Yeah.
the government,
Right. Exactly.
you know.
The civil servant class.
Exactly.
Yes.
So Laboni and councilments don't have that level of like native ethnic history as like other parts of Accra. Yeah, so you'll see a lot of police, military, so on and so forth, and councilmen, and then you're gonna see a lot of people with a history of civil service in Laboni. So yeah, my grandmother was director of state housing, and she got allocated a plot of land in Laboni, and that ended up being where she moved eventually with her husband, my grandfather, when they moved back from Rome, which is where they lived before.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, so my parents lived in that house when I was born. So I was born 5 minutes away from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's home.
Yep. I've known it forever.
And you have to keep it forever because there's no way to let it go now because it's a land grab town nowadays.
Very big land grab itself.
Yeah.
It makes me sad.
Yeah, and you are active about it.
Am I?
Yeah, aren't you? Tell us about some of your recent projects. You mentioned being a rapper. So you've taken the spoken word to another level, and you recently launched an album, I think.
Yes.
So tell us, what is Koshka? Is that's
Yes.
that's the group and everything.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
Okay, so there is this thing called the Kushka Sound Residency. It is organized by Black Girls Glow. Black Girls Glow is an organization that's based in Ghana. It was started by Ama Sanswa Diaka, also known as Poetra Sanswa, about 8 years ago. And its mission is essentially to support and further the careers of African women who create with sound. So these could be instrumentalists, singers, rappers, spoken word artists, composers, anyone who is an African woman and works with sound. Previously, all the sound residencies were just called Black Girls Blue. But then Black Girls Blue started branching out into so many different avenues that the sound residency needed a different name. So in 2024, for the first time, the sound residency was named Kushka. And the reason why it's called a sound residency is because even though each residency leads to the creation of an album, these albums aren't necessarily just musical albums. Like the genres blend so much. Like there are some tracks that are literally just like conversations, right? Some voice notes kind of music and interludes. There's been some that have just been like skits, just like audio dramas. So it's really more about sound and not as much about the music, although there's a very heavy music influence. So I've known about Black Girls Blue since its inception, but there's always been some sort of conflict when it's time to apply for the residency. And this year, for the first time, there was no conflict. So I was one of 7 women who got to go and hide away in Isola for 9 days and spend 2.5 of those days creating an album.
Okay.
So
like quick fast.
it was crunch time over there. It
Wow.
was insane. It was such a unique experience. I'm working on writing about it.
Okay.
But yeah, so the product is a new album called Don't Lose It, which features me and 6 other really incredible African women. Every cohort has a different theme. And this year's theme was the artist accountability. So our tracks were essentially created around the theme of the artist accountability.
Okay. And so did you have any parameters? Like everyone had to be lead on a song? What were some of the kind of the frameworks for what you're meant to produce?
So so we had to have a minimum of, I think, 10 songs. Each one of us had to have led at least one song, and there was a minimum of 3 people who could be on each song. Yeah, those are some of the parameters, and we only had, like I said, 2.5 days to start and finish the entire writing, recording, composing process, which was crazy.
That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. And this past summer, I did a writer's retreat in upstate New York, and it's called the Wild Seeds Writers Retreat.
Tell me about that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's the Center for Black Literature that sponsors it. And so there are 3 different cohorts, which are fiction, nonfiction / memoir, and then screenwriting. And I was in the screenwriting cohort. And our final presentation to the group was a writer's room. So, and we did it in a day. So what you're saying about like 2 days to do this, I can absolutely relate. Yeah. Wow. So that's exciting. Yeah. So now you have this body of work, and just thinking like business wise, as it, thinking about creative, intellectual property rights, that kind of thing. How is that part of this story? So, is it commercially available? Is it just really part of this creative canon of works that Black Girls Glow does? What is the next step for that work?
So Black Girls Glow is still, I mean, it's existed for 8 years, but because of limited funding and other factors, it's still a bit of a fledgling organization.
Sure.
Give it money when you can. But intellectual property rights and that sort of thing is still in its nascent stages. I feel like each project at this point has sort of different rights, like agreements with its artists. All the albums are commercially available for streaming and for purchase, I think, as well. But then the rights keep evolving as the organization grows.
Okay.
So some of the earliest albums were not available for streaming when they were first released, but now they are.
Okay.
The organization is working on things like licensing.
Okay.
But yeah, these are all still things that are very much in progress.
Yeah.
So I think that the focus of these albums right now is to basically give the organization flesh. Because one thing that makes opportunities in Africa sort of different from how they may be in other parts of the world is that people want to see a product to basically believe that what is happening is worthwhile. So it's all well and good to just, go to a residency, but then if you don't see the product of that, especially if it's happening in Africa, like there is perhaps reason to believe that the money is being eaten by someone or that this is not worth funding because you don't see the results of where your money went and so on and so forth. So for that reason, no matter what is the priority for an album to be created after every residency, but clearly even the time allocation speaks a lot, because for the first 7 days or so, like we are in workshops, we are learning from like each other, from resource persons that come to visit, and then we only have like 2.5 days to make the album, which shows you that the priority is essentially on like learning and like artist development. But we have to make a product because it's Africa and we have to show working.
Sure. Yeah. That's very interesting. So the show notes will have, as Akotowaa mentioned, a link so that, you can give and you can find the album. So just stay tuned for that one. All right. So let's talk about this spider kit.
Yeah.
Oh my God. What is that about?
What is that about? So I have mentioned, I'm not wearing my spider necklace today.
But you're wearing the purple.
I'm wearing the purple. That's true. So I mentioned some, mental health challenges that I was dealing with. And in 2017, around my birthday, which is like, it's in May, so nearly half of the year, right? I decided, you know what, I'm gonna need a revamp, right? So I'm gonna do some work on my branding, and I'm gonna do some work on my internal drive and motivation.
Okay.
So what I did is I created an alter ego. And I called her the Spider Kid. This is not my first time creating an alter ego. I have done this so many times since my mental health challenges started, actually. But the Spider Kid has lasted the longest. And I feel like it's going to last a good while more. Essentially, I was in my second year of college in the US. And as it tends to be with many people, I started to feel my Ghanaianness a lot more while I was out of Ghana, because it was no longer default, And, that further consciousness of my identity also fed into my new independence. Well, more independence than I'd had previously in shaping the course of my career as a writer and so on. And I ended up zeroing in on the image of the spider, whom I can't know as Kweku Anansi, right? Or Anansi generally. And then, I did some thinking about the spider as a symbol. And it just felt like the nexus of so many things that I wanted to connect to. Anansi is Akan, I'm Akan in two ways. I'm Asante and Ekuapem, right? Two parts Akan and one part Ewe.
Oh, okay.
Even though the empath is
Yeah.
like the strongest influence on me in my family, I
Okay.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's Ghanaian, it's Akan, it's so immediately recognizable over here as a character, but also as an art form. Because, in tree, there's no word for fiction outside of Anansi. Like Anansi is all fictional storytelling. When you look into the history and the usage of the word,
Yeah.
any Anansi doesn't necessarily need to involve an of the character.
Right. It's just that genre, basically. Yeah.
And if you look at the Enigma symbols as well, the only one that has direct to do with creativity is the Anansi and the spider's web, which represents wisdom and creativity. The next year, I got a tattoo of that symbol, so I have it on my left shoulder.
Uh-huh.
So there was all of that, and then the spider is so culturally important to Akans, even though we don't seem to always realize it.
Yeah.
Like the spider is behind the myth of the creation of kente, which is such an integral part of culture
Yeah.
of Akans, right? So I mean, there's a
So the
story about
weaving
some
of,
exactly
yeah.
a story about some men going into a forest and then a spider teaching them how to weave, and that's how kente was born. The very, very summarized version of that story, but there's that. And then, philosophically also, I feel like the orb weaver spider is an artist because the spider web is artistic.
Yeah.
It's pretty beautiful.
Pretty amazing. Yeah.
But it's
amazing.
also the way that the spider feeds itself.
Right.
And for me, that felt like this is the image of a self-sustaining artist. It is the spider. So I adopted the spider as part of my identity at the same time as I launched a passion project called On the Ceiling, where I basically bent analysis gender and also transposed him into a new time. So I made him a teenage girl in JSS3 called Kukwa Anan.
Ah, okay.
So for the rest of that year, I released a short story every month.
Uh-huh.
And there were 8 months left in the year, and the spider has 8 legs. So
Okay, I love how you
I'm very
put it all
intentional.
together.
Like, when I
Yes.
decide to do a thing, I just go all in.
Sure.
And keep doing it for the rest of time.
Right. Then you figure out how it morphs into another. Yeah.
Yes. So I have stuck with the identity of the Spider Kid, and that's essentially what that is about. It's also the Spider Kid is the ego that I tap into when I am feeling like demotivated, when I am feeling self-doubt. It's like, Akotowaa may feel, but the Spider Kid is like such an idea that she can't fail. Like when Akotowaa is feeling trash, the Spider Kid is always cool. Like I can just step into the identity, as a creator. Yeah, so the intersection of my identity can also flow for my storytelling.
So you mentioned having mental health challenges, and so when you came up with this, was this part of a therapeutic process that you came up with, or in working with a mental health professional?
This was all me.
This was self-healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm very glad I did it.
Yeah, good for you.
It was the highlight of my year.
Yeah, good for you. And it's sustaining, right? So you've figured out a hack, so to speak, to...
It was, in fact, a consistency project.
Yeah.
Because I did feel very frustrated at myself for how little I was producing in terms of writing, because I felt like I just wasn't finishing stories. Like I would start things and then abandon them and so on. So I actually I set up a whole chart in my bedroom with there was a formula for every single story.
Okay.
Determine the setting, determine the trick the character plays, determine this, determine that. And so, it was formulaic in multiple ways. And I feel like that's also something that I feel like I learned as a skill from watching TV.
Sure.
Police procedurals
right.
and stuff like that. They just have this formula that works. And so I was like, let me see how far I can push myself. A limited time project. So I'm gonna do so and so number of stories, and then I'm gonna release one every month. So limited in time, limited in scope, and then limited in structure. So every story had a formula. And I was like, let me use this as a way to prove to myself that I can keep consistent.
Mm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
some of the
Nice.
stories were really bad. In terms of writing, I feel like the stories were good. They just weren't written well, which is why I spent most of this year rewriting them.
Good for you, because that sounds like a great project
It's
to
so
re-release.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
I love it so much.
Yeah.
So I just re-released all the stories
Oh, nice.
again.
Okay,
I
good.
haven't announced it, but it's
coming.
available on the internet. It's already
Oh,
available.
okay.
Yeah.
Nice. That's the Spider Kid, but let's talk more about words and get into local speak. So this is a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, and why or how you've come to value it as local speak.
Oh my gosh. It's so difficult to like narrow in on something.
Yeah.
So let me go by the phrase that has caused the most amount of fanfare in my recent
Oh, okay.
recent history.
Yeah.
The phrase is sorry for left. Are you familiar with that?
Yes. Yes, that's a good one.
So non-Ghanaians find it hilarious
Uh-huh.
in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess that the origin of the phrase is essentially from the taboo of doing things with your left hand, like handing things to people because that is supposed to be the hand that you do unspeakable
Right.
things with. It's not your polite hand. Your right hand is your polite hand.
Right.
And this is a culture where many people in my generation and before, although I'm not necessarily sure if after, were beaten if they were left-handed
Right.
as children and forced to switch hands because the left hand is your bad hand and so on and so forth. So, if you are making a transaction or, buying something from a vendor or whatever, usually it does take two hands because they have to like give you your food and then give you your change or collect your money or whatever at the same time. So, every time a left hand has to be used, a Ghanaian would typically say sorry for left. But in local parlance, it has come to mean something a lot more sarcastic.
Oh, okay. This is new.
So, if you sort of offend somebody in a way that is not that serious,
Oh,
like
okay.
you could say a sardonic sorry for left.
Sure.
So, for example, if you had a PhD and I introduced you as Miss,
Right. As opposed to doctor. Right.
and then you're like, actually, it's doctor, I would be like, sorry for left.
Right. Yeah.
It's
yeah.
like,
I like that. Yeah, I like
sorry,
that.
I didn't know. Like,
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Sorry for the laughs. Yeah, I was, so over in the festival, on my panel was Nicole Amatakio. And so in my prepping for that, I watched the first season of An African City. And that was one of the, on one of the series, one of the episodes. So it's fresher in my mind. Yeah. So it's easy. What's good about it is that they're short, so it's easy to revisit. Like an hour and a half, you're through it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. So yeah, sorry for left. All right. So we've spoken about a lot of things and a little bit about the business of being a writer. Let's drive down a little bit deeper in terms of how you now have, you've done these smaller projects, but you now have a novella. So this is something that you had to go through the entire process of working with publishers, etc. So tell us about that work and the business behind it. Yeah. So the creative and the business behind the Year of Return.
Right. So, when I wrote The Year of Return, I actually didn't expect it ever to be a book.
Yeah.
I did not. It was originally meant to be a short story, which is just clear evidence of my delusion because I don't know how you fit such a heavy theme. The theme is, our complex history of involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, and the repercussions of that for the present. From a speculative fiction perspective. So I think that the book is genre-wise a bit of something like sci-fi horror, something like that.
Sure.
Not horrific because it's actually scary, but horrific because the actual slave trade was horrific. And if you have ghost in your book, it's probably like,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's just put it on that shelf, the horror one.
Right. Right.
Honestly, I didn't even think about genre as I was writing. It's a marketing tool that the publishers.
That's what I was going to say. It was
take
just
care of
marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought, this it's a novella, it's shorter than a novel, right? And so I didn't expect it to be its own book, actually. I wasn't even familiar with the growing trend of publishing novellas as their own books. I expected it to just be something I submitted to a magazine that accepts really long stories. I think my first draft was about 23,000 words.
Okay.
Final draft is about 32,000 words.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I expected it to be, a submission to something. But, I told my agent, oh, I just wrote this thing. And then she immediately started trying to shop it around for a publisher.
Yeah. And was it finished when you told your agent, or was you still in process?
Well, so that's a good question because I thought it was finished.
Because it was a shorter piece.
No,
Oh, okay.
just because I didn't have the level of craft knowledge then that I do now.
Okay.
It seemed finished to me because that felt like the best that I could do. It felt like, and then along the lines, getting feedback from like actual editors at publishing houses and, from peer writers and so on. I'm like, oh, there's much more work to be done actually, which is probably why there's 10,000 more words in the final book than the initial draft.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my agent started shopping it around and it went through several rejections or being ignored for reasons that could have had to do with the actual quality of writing, because I definitely know that the first draft was not like where the current version is quality wise. Could also be that the length was weird. Novellas are not popular things to publish.
Right.
It's just like, it is too long for a short story, but it's also not a complete novel. What are we going to do with this?
Right. Yeah.
I think publishers, it's an industry, so they want to do what makes money, So all of that made it a bit difficult to sell. And then it finally did sell to a small indie publisher in the US. And I think what I wish I'd understood better at that time was how rights work. Publication rights, sales rights. So I essentially signed world rights to the US publisher.
Okay.
Every other publisher that had been approached, including ones in Africa, had either not responded or rejected it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I felt like there was some pressure on me to accept this offer. And so when it was time to, well, most of my fan base is in West Africa, I suppose, because I actually have spent most of my life here.
Right.
So most people who are interested in my writing are here. And so it was very important to me and to my agents to make sure that the book was available here. And all of the international costs and barriers were such big deterrents to just like shipping the American copies down. Like, it's a much more complex process.
Yeah.
And so the solution was to sell West African rights from the US publisher, for the US publisher to sell West African rights to a West African publisher, which is how we ended up with Smartline as my Ghanaian publisher.
Okay.
And I love them. They are amazing.
Oh, that's
and
good.
they've done such a good job so far. And
Nice.
I really do love working with them. So, that's some of the business side of it. A lot of writers in Ghana opt for self-publishing because, everything is so complicated in the publishing world because it is a complex industry, especially if you don't have an agent. It can be almost overwhelming to navigate, and then it becomes a lot easier to self-publish. I was not interested in going that route, first of all, because I don't like doing extra work. I don't have time for that. Like, when you self-publish,
you're a whole business vertical. Yeah.
sort out your own cover art and
Yes.
sort out your own retailers and like go and negotiate with the printer yourself. And I wrote a book. Like, when you always put in extra work. And then there's also the quality aspect. It's like, it's such a big misconception that like every writer is like able to edit especially to edit their own work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have read some self-published books in Ghana that just have the most ridiculous typos and
Yeah.
just very
Yeah.
long turns of
Right.
phrases. Like, this
Right.
is not how you use this English expression. Like,
Sure.
please,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
all
Right.
of
Right.
that stuff,
Yeah.
like, nobody catches because, if you wanted an editor, you'd have to pay for one out of pocket. And, you probably also assume that because you're a writer, you know English. So, like, why do you have to pay someone to read your English? But you do. You
Right.
do
Yeah.
that. So yeah, for various reasons, just was not interested in the self-publishing route, and I'm blessed to have an agent, so that doesn't have to be a thing.
So is your agent based here, or where's your agent based?
She is based between South Africa and the Netherlands.
Okay.
Her agency is headquartered in South Africa.
Okay.
It's called the African Literary Agency.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And is that was part of that genesis out of your time spent in Cape Town, or you just happened to?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about her or the agency while I was in Cape Town. She actually just cold reached out to me
Really?
in 2020.
Okay.
If I had a visitation offer.
Nice.
That's how she found
I love that. Yeah. So now tell us about the story. What is give us a teaser, tell us a little bit about the story in the context of, because when we do write this speculative fiction, I know that as I create speculative stories, I'm moving more into the Afrofuture space with my writing. It is how I am being an activist, because I'm imagining the world that I would love to see, that I know that without creating that seed for imagination for young people to at least to see or to read, that it may never happen. So tell us about if there's activist intent in that work, but if not, just what is the genesis of wanting to tell that story, and how does that story, what is a framework around?
I really love what you just said about how you incorporate activism, because so I did a panel at Bija Literary Festival over the weekend where that theme came up, the activism of it all. And one of my answers was like, a lot of the time I write speculative fiction because there are these problems in the world that I want to solve, and based on the current reality, I cannot see the solution. So I have to make one up with magic, and that's how
That is it. Yeah.
So this one in particular, I would say that as soon as I heard of the initiative, the Ghanaian government's initiative for
Citizenship,
I started thinking about this. And I knew the end of the story before I ever, before anything else. This sat in my mind for maybe 1 or 2 years without me ever writing a word of it. And I would say that something that really changed was me going to, so I took this class. It was a history course about essentially the middle path of the journey of Africans from motherland to New World. And as part of that, we read this book by Stephanie Smallwood called Saltwater Slavery. And for the first time, I really considered things from the perspective of an Akan African who was enslaved and found themselves in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with a traditional framework for what reality really is. I think until that point, every sort of slave narrative or whatever that I'd seen was from someone who was already very well situated in the new world, right? At least enough to have become literate, to have had their story written, perhaps had been born into slavery and so on and so forth. Which means, having come into pretty close proximity with like Christianity or like whatever the master's, dominant religion was. So to read this history and then consider, in Akan cosmology, death is a transition. When you see Asantes taking their funerals very, very seriously, you know that it has very deep cultural roots. Like, Masa is known for his funerals, and there's a reason why culturally. death in this world is supposed to be a way to transition into the world of the ancestors, Asamando, right? And to do that, there are all of these elaborate rituals that need to be completed and completed well. Whether it's, being buried with the things that will help you like feed yourself and feed yourself on your way there, or any other aspect. And the most important aspect, I would say, is being buried in the ground, in the earth. Like, you must return to Asase. Yeah, it's an integral part of your transition process, right? And so to find yourself in the middle of the ocean and know that you are going to die, and know that there's no land to be buried in, much less family to bury, what does that mean for your soul's eternity? Like, I had never seen anyone or anything until that point consider the psychological terror of knowing that your soul, your spirit would never find peace because you would never go through those rituals because your body would be in the sea. Like, that struck me so hard, so deeply. I was like, this needs to be explored. Especially since the actual Year of Return initiative that was, being carried out by the government at the time didn't seem to put a lot of emphasis on our actual history.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the culture, even in the welcome
gosh.
back, is to understand.
None
Yes,
of it
I get it.
felt
Yeah.
very historically rooted. If you ask the average Ghanaian right now why the Year of Return was 2019, they couldn't tell you anything about the year 1619,
Right.
which was supposed to be the entire reason 2019 was chosen.
Right.
400 years after the arrival of the ship, the White Lion, in Virginia, with these first African enslaved people. What is White Lion? Like, we don't know that. 1619. Whose business is that? Like, that's not our business. When you see the way Ghanaians even talk about slavery, the slave trade, it's like, that's the Americans' business.
Right.
The castles are on our land.
Right.
Like, what do you think happened over here?
Yeah.
Like, we act so detached from it. And even though there is a saturation of slavery-themed stories by people of African descent, I don't feel like West Africans, especially modern West Africans, have engaged with it nearly as much as we should.
We haven't.
Nearly as much. And so, as much as I didn't want to be another Black writer writing a book about slavery, the way this story called to me, it was just like something is wrong with the world and the way that we are going about things and the way that we are acknowledging or refusing to acknowledge our history that I need to do something about. And the Year of Return was sort of my way of doing something about that.
Yeah.
And I think that the core of the novella is essentially my goal as well, like honoring the ancestors. There are so many people from Africa who never made it to the other side, and have their legacies like chronicled, and I felt like something needed to be dedicated to them. And that's what this novella is. It's also like an offering to the African diaspora as well.
Sure.
From
From me. Yeah. And I'm happy you said that, because where we are stuck is, and why I'm so committed to this diaspora concept and Pan-African activism, is because we are not connected with that story. We're refusing to recognize, even here, that even though we didn't have settlement slavery, we were the same. It's all the same. And even the roles that those that were here played in that story. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but someone I went to high school with had posted something, there's this ADOS people, there's always attempts at division. So the ADOS, which is Americans of African descent, right, as opposed to just Black people. And so he said, there was a white man who was saying, I'm going to call people ADOS instead of Black because that's a point of distinction. Those Americans of African descent are survivors and they're powerful and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, again, we're letting this white man tell us a narrative. But that friend posted and I said, well, how about we're all just Black? Why don't we just all be Black? That is the only way, without putting separations between us, will we ever move forward. right? So first, let's recognize, okay, we all come from the same place, and then acknowledge that there are these varied histories and the psychologies around it. And the way he ripped one, he said, oh, easy for you to say when your ancestors were selling mine. That's not
It's
an
the
uncommon sentiment.
whole Killmonger conversation all over again. Oh my gosh. And I did have to fight a little bit to have Africans be referred to as Black in my novella. There was some pushback against it because I guess in the conversation about privileges, it's just like because Black is the default in so many sub-Saharan African countries, I guess, it's just like, yeah, we have the privilege of not being called Black because Black is default, and it's a different conversation for like people in, countries that were once dominantly European or da 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 da. But I was just like, Black is description of Black was first given to people in Africa before they ever took us out. Like we, on this continent was the first time that we were called Black, and all the historical documents written by white people call us Black, whether whether we are the majority or not in that country. So, as much as African Americans and, other Black people in the diaspora have reclaimed that Black, I feel like it is also a move of Pan-Africanism to reclaim it for Africans based on the continent as well. Anyways, I have all of these thoughts and things.
So many. But this is a good time to ask about a mindset hack. So how do you hack your mindset? Something that you practice, something that you know of, or something that you can imagine as your mindset hack?
Things can feel really daunting if they seem too large. There's a common piece of advice about, breaking tasks into smaller bits and pieces. For me, I've started breaking the amount of time I spend on very big, daunting tasks and limiting them to 20 minutes. So
in a way.
Yes, and writing my novel that I've been working on for the last couple of years, sometimes it's just like, oh, I want to dedicate this and this much time to it every day. But then I look at the time and then like, I feel bored in advance. I'm like, I am never going to be able to sit here for that long and crack out all of these words. So I'm just like, you only have to do it for 20 minutes and then you can just go do whatever you want. And I end up being so productive. And then I choose my 20 minutes like as and when. And it's only 20 minutes. It's not 20 minutes that have to make up 3 hours, or it's just 20 minutes. And that has calmed me down so much.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, chip away. And 20 minutes is a great chunk of time.
Yeah.
Right? And if you go over, you go over.
Yeah.
But that you've identified that it's very manageable, like you said, the boredom. So good one. Okay. So we've talked a lot about the work, the business, the writing. So we want to know, who are you when you're not working or writing? Are you a reader? We know you are. A watcher? We know you are. Or a listener? But what are some of your favorite reads, watches, or listens? Or how do you spend your time when you're in your leisure?
Who am I? I love the color purple. Like I literally do love the color purple.
Yeah.
I do also like the Alice Walker novel, but I mean
like
the actual color.
Yeah.
All shades of violet. I love it. I do spend a lot of time reading, but although I haven't done it much in the most recent months, I love swimming as well. Yeah.
Where do you swim here?
Belma Camp.
Yeah.
The sports complex. Yeah. I recently got into gymming, so I'm also like,
Becoming a gym rat.
Yeah, a little bit, like small by small. Like I may be a gym mouse at this point, and maybe at some point I get big enough to be called a rat.
Well, keep it up, because as we age, strength is a big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So building the muscle.
I
early.
already have physical problems that I'm not supposed to be having at this age. So yeah, I'm trying to take the physical health a lot more seriously. I actually don't watch as many things as most other people. I think this is going to sound really ironic, but I have a really short attention span. People are like, then how do you read 52 books a year? Listen, in 10-minute bursts. But, the concept of just like sitting there and like staring at the screen. I feel like with books, at least I'm like turning pages or like there's some sort of like intermittent activity, but like sitting down and just like looking at a screen is very difficult for me. Maybe I have ADD, I don't know. But
No, I get it. Yeah.
so yeah, I don't watch that many things, but I did recently have a Doctor Who obsession.
Oh.
I really loved Doctor Who. Actually, one of my short stories from the last few years was Doctor Who inspired.
Really?
Doctor Who inspired tale.
So is this the new Doctor Who or any kind of Doctor Who, or is it vintage Doctor Who?
So it's the new series, the one that started in 2009.
Okay.
No,
But
not
Doctor Who
2009.
is now
The
a
one that
black guy,
started with-
right?
Yes, I haven't seen the most recent seasons, but everything from the ninth Doctor to midway through the 13th Doctor, I have seen.
Oh, okay.
The Black Doctor in Ncuti Gatwa, that's the 14th.
Yes.
So I haven't.
Okay.
I know the numbers of the Doctors.
There
yes.
you go.
So there's that. I think my favorite TV series till dates is probably BBC Sherlock.
Oh.
Yes, there's a pattern here. The pattern is like, the genius asshole protagonist sort of thing. I'm very into that apparently. It just goes to show, because I think my first literary crush was Artemis Fowl, who is also very much genius asshole protagonist. Yeah, reading. What have I really loved recently? I think I read this last year, but Jennifer Makumbi's Manchester Happened short story collection was just like phenomenal. I think this year, one of my favorite reads has been Night's Bloom by Peace Ajo Midie. Ghanaian author, got shortlisted for the Women's Prize, I think. It's just like so good. I read so many good books, I think. My most recent read was How to Say Babylon by Safia Sinclair. Yeah. Memoir, been making a lot of waves. Also a pretty good read.
So we have, again, the show notes are going to be so rich. You can spend a whole month going through reading, watching, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been so wonderful. It's been fun. Thank you for your time. So before we go, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
This may seem a little left, but what I want to share is in our current era where everything is productivity and commercialism and, advertising and just all of the, how do we monetize? How do we, get better? I think don't let go of the freedom of being human and the joys of being human. It doesn't feel related to anything we've talked about, which was I was like, just sort of like, it just turned in a different direction. But I think that is really important to keep hearing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the spirit of activism. We are just trying to get to our humanity in the best way possible. So you've brought it full circle. Thank you.
You too.
It's been so wonderful. All right, Glocal citizens, this has been another episode of the podcast. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. You can leave us up to a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, thumbs up on Google. Remember, it helps others find great content on the internet. And this is great content. And also remember to check the show notes because you can see so many of our Writing as Activism guests on the Writers Project Ghana TV YouTube channel, which there will be a link to. I think you will see Akotowaa on some of those as well. And until next time, bye for now.